The courtroom buzzed with energy, a mix of reporters scribbling notes, lawyers whispering strategies, and spectators craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the unfolding drama. It was a high-profile case that had captured national attention, one involving billions of dollars, cutting-edge technology, and allegations of corruption at the highest levels. At the center of it all sat Judge William Harper, a man whose stern expression rarely betrayed emotion, but whose reputation for fairness had earned him respect across the legal community. Karoline Leavitt, a young woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, stood beside her legal team. She was dressed professionally in a tailored navy blue suit, yet there was something about her demeanor, her quiet confidence, that made her stand out. Karoline wasn't just another entrepreneur fighting for her business. She was a symbol of innovation crushed under the weight of greed. Her company, once hailed as a pioneer in artificial intelligence, now teetered on the brink of collapse after being targeted by Harper Industries, a corporate giant accused of stealing her ideas and sabotaging her operations. On the other side of the room, Richard Harper, CEO of Harper Industries, sat flanked by his expensive team of attorneys. Unlike Judge Harper, Richard wore his arrogance like a badge of honor. His polished shoes clicked against the marble floor as he adjusted his tie, smirking whenever someone dared to look his way. To him, this trial was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a bump in the road that would eventually smooth itself out. As the proceedings began, Judge Harper called for order. His voice carried authority, commanding silence from the crowded room. "This court is now in session," he announced, his gavel striking the wooden block with precision. The tension in the air thickened as the first pieces of evidence were presented. Documents detailing illegal surveillance tactics, leaked emails discussing stolen intellectual property, and financial records pointing to suspicious transactions painted a damning picture of Harper Industries. Karoline's lead attorney, a seasoned lawyer named Margaret Ellis, moved confidently through her arguments. She laid out the timeline of events, showing how Karoline's groundbreaking AI software had been reverse-engineered and marketed by Harper Industries almost overnight. "Your Honor," she said, turning toward Judge Harper, "this isn't just a matter of theft, it's a calculated attack on innovation, designed to crush competition and monopolize the market." Richard's defense team countered with technical jargon and claims of coincidence, arguing that any similarities between the two products were purely accidental. But their arguments lacked conviction, especially when faced with the mounting evidence against them. Even some members of the jury exchanged skeptical glances, sensing that something wasn't adding up. Outside the courtroom, the story dominated. Headlines. Social media exploded with hashtags supporting Karoline, while news outlets dissected every detail of the trial. Public opinion leaned heavily in her favor, fueled by outrage over what many saw as yet another example of big corporations exploiting smaller players. Yet amidst the noise, whispers began to circulate about Judge Harper himself. Anonymous sources claimed he held significant shares in Harper Industries, inherited from distant relatives who had invested early in the company's rise. These allegations cast doubt on his ability to remain impartial, raising questions about whether the entire trial was rigged from the start. At first, Judge Harper dismissed the rumors as baseless attacks meant to undermine the integrity of the court. He issued statements reaffirming his commitment to justice, insisting that no personal ties could sway his decisions. But behind closed doors, he grew increasingly uneasy. Late at night, alone in his chambers, he scrolled through articles accusing him of bias. Each headline felt like a punch to the gut, chipping away at the carefully constructed image he'd spent decades building. Then came the bombshell. A whistleblower within Harper Industries leaked documents proving direct communication between Judge Harper and Richard Harper during critical stages of the trial. Emails revealed discussions about delaying certain motions and dismissing key witnesses, actions that clearly benefited the defense. When these revelations hit the press, the backlash was immediate and fierce. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs that read, "No justice, no peace," and demanding Judge Harper's removal from the case. For Karoline, this development was both shocking and infuriating. She had trusted the system to protect her rights only to find herself trapped in a web of corruption. Determined not to let the situation spiral further out of control, she instructed her legal team to push for expedited proceedings. Every delay gave Richard Harper more time to manipulate the process, and she couldn't afford to wait any longer. Margaret agreed, filing motions to speed up the trial schedule. The pressure intensified as new evidence continued to surface, each piece more incriminating than the last. One particularly explosive document showed Judge Harper receiving large sums of money transferred through offshore accounts linked to Harper Industries. Though he denied any wrongdoing, the damage was done. Trust in him evaporated, replaced by suspicion and anger. Amidst the chaos, Judge Harper made a decision that would change everything. On a rainy Tuesday evening, just days before the next round of hearings, he disappeared. His car was found abandoned near O'Hare Airport, its engine still running. Inside, investigators discovered a burner phone containing a series of cryptic text messages. "They're watching me. I have no choice. If you care about your safety, stay away." Speculation ran wild. Some believed he had fled to avoid accountability, seeking refuge in countries without extradition treaties. Others thought he might be running from someone or something far more dangerous. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear. Judge Harper's sudden departure left the trial in limbo, throwing the future of the case into uncertainty. Karoline, however, refused to give up. Standing before cameras outside the courthouse the following morning, she addressed the nation with unwavering resolve. "This isn't just my fight anymore," she declared, her voice steady despite the storm raging around her. "It's a fight for everyone who believes in fairness, honesty, and the rule of law. We will see this through to the end, no matter what it takes." Her words resonated deeply, reigniting hope among those who had begun to lose faith in the system. Behind the scenes, though, the battle was far from over. As Judge Harper vanished into thin air, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions, the real war was only beginning. Days turned into weeks, and Judge William Harper's sudden disappearance remained a mystery. The nation was gripped by the story, with news outlets speculating endlessly about his whereabouts. Some claimed he had fled to South America, others whispered about secret hideouts in Europe. But one thing was certain: the man who had once been seen as a pillar of justice was now viewed as a fugitive running from his own crimes. In Buenos Aires, Argentina, a man calling himself Carlos Mendez stepped off a private jet at a small, secluded airport. He wore sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low over his face, doing everything he could to avoid attention. This man was none other than Judge Harper, hiding under an alias and desperate to stay off the radar. His hands trembled slightly as he clutched a duffel bag filled with cash, fake identification papers, and a burner phone. For the first time in his life, Harper felt truly alone. Harper checked into a modest hotel in a quiet neighborhood, far from the bustling tourist areas. He spent his days locked in his room, watching the news on a small television and scanning the internet for updates on the case back home. Every mention of his name made him flinch. Reporters described him as a coward, a traitor to the legal system he had sworn to uphold. Public opinion had turned against him completely, and even his colleagues distanced themselves, afraid of being tainted by association. Meanwhile, investigative journalist Linda Meyer was working tirelessly to uncover the truth behind Harper's escape. A seasoned reporter known for her relentless pursuit of justice, Linda had built a reputation for exposing corruption at every level. She had already written several articles questioning Harper's impartiality during the trial. But now she wanted answers, real answers. Who was helping him? Where was he hiding? And why did it seem like someone else was pulling the strings? Linda started by digging into Harper's past. She combed through old financial records, court documents, and interviews with people who had worked closely with him. What she found shocked her. There were connections between Harper and shadowy political figures, offshore accounts tied to dubious business dealings, and hints of involvement with an organization known only as the Syndicate. It was a name whispered in hushed tones. Among those who knew too much, a group rumored to manipulate global markets, silence whistleblowers, and control powerful institutions from behind the scenes. Back in Chicago, Karoline Leavitt struggled to keep her company afloat. The media frenzy surrounding Judge Harper's disappearance had shifted focus away from her lawsuit, and public interest in her fight against Harper Industries began to wane. Investors grew nervous, pulling their support as uncertainty loomed. Despite the setbacks, Karoline refused to give up. She poured all her energy into preparing for the next phase of the trial, determined to see it through no matter what. To strengthen her case, Karoline hired Daniel Cruz, a former FBI agent turned private investigator. Daniel was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a no-nonsense attitude and a knack for getting results. He had spent years tracking down criminals and unraveling complex conspiracies, and he wasn't intimidated by the challenges ahead. When Karoline explained the situation to him, laying out the evidence they had so far and the gaps they needed to fill, Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "I'll find him," Daniel promised, his voice calm but firm. "If Harper's still breathing, I'll track him down." Daniel's investigation led him to Argentina, where whispers of a man matching Harper's description had surfaced. Using his contacts in law enforcement and intelligence networks, Daniel pieced together clues pointing to Harper's location. He learned that Harper had been moving from place to place, always staying one step ahead of anyone looking for him. But there was something strange about Harper's behavior. It wasn't just fear of the law driving him. He seemed to be running from something or someone else entirely. As Daniel closed in on Harper, the judge's paranoia reached new heights. One night, while meeting with a local contact who claimed to have information about the syndicate, Harper sensed danger. The streets around him were eerily quiet and shadows moved in the corners of his vision. Suddenly, a black car screeched to a halt nearby and two men jumped out, guns drawn. Harper bolted, his heart pounding as he darted into a narrow alleyway. Bullets ricocheted off the walls behind him, but he managed to escape, disappearing into the labyrinth of Buenos Aires side streets. Shaken and terrified, Harper realized he couldn't handle this alone. He reached out to the one person he thought might still care, his estranged daughter, Emily Harper. A school teacher living in Boston, Emily hadn't spoken to her father in years. Their relationship had been strained since her teenage years, when Harper's demanding career and cold demeanor drove a wedge between them. But now, facing death threats and hunted by unknown enemies, Harper begged her for help. At first, Emily wanted nothing to do with him. Memories of broken promises and missed birthdays flooded back, filling her with anger and resentment. How dare he reach out after all these years, expecting her to drop everything and save him? Yet as she read his frantic messages and listened to his voicemails, something stirred inside her. Beneath the surface of his pleas, she heard genuine fear, and perhaps even regret. Curiosity got the better of her. Emily agreed to meet Harper in secret, traveling to Buenos Aires under the guise of a vacation. They met in a dimly lit cafe. Late at night, both wary and unsure of how to act around each other. Harper looked older, his face lined with worry, his eyes hollow. He confessed everything. The pressure from Harper Industries, the threats from the syndicate, the realization that he had become a pawn in a game far bigger than himself. Emily listened silently, torn between disgust at her father's actions and pity for the mess he had created. In the end, she decided to help, not because she forgave him, but because she believed exposing the truth was more important than holding grudges. Together, they devised a plan to leak classified documents to Linda Meyer, whose articles had already sparked widespread outrage. If the world knew the full extent of the syndicate's operations, maybe Harper's sins could serve a greater purpose. As Emily and Harper worked to gather evidence, Daniel tracked them to the cafe. Watching from across the street, he recognized Harper immediately. But before he could approach, he noticed Emily leaving the building. Something about her caught his attention. Her resemblance to Harper was unmistakable. Realizing she might be his daughter, Daniel hesitated. Instead of confronting Harper right away, he decided to follow Emily, hoping she would lead him to more answers. That night, Emily confided in Daniel, pleading with him to hear her father's side of the story before turning him over to the authorities. She explained their plan to expose the syndicate and begged him to give them a chance to make things right. Daniel, though skeptical, agreed to listen. As he sat down with Harper, he saw a broken man, someone who had made terrible choices but who now seemed willing to face the consequences. The stakes were higher than ever. Harper knew he couldn't run forever, and Daniel understood that bringing him to justice was only part of the equation. The real battle lay ahead. Taking down the syndicate and ensuring that the truth came to light no matter the cost. The days that followed were a blur of tension and secrecy. Judge William Harper, now living under the alias Carlos Mendez, stayed holed up in a dingy apartment on the outskirts of Buenos Aires. His daughter, Emily Harper, visited him daily, bringing food and updates from the outside world. Together they worked tirelessly to gather evidence against the syndicate, knowing their lives depended on exposing the truth before it was too late. Harper's paranoia grew with each passing hour. He jumped at every sound, convinced someone was watching him. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of his vision, and the hum of distant traffic sounded like footsteps closing in. At night, he barely slept, clutching a knife under his pillow as if it could protect him from unseen threats. Emily tried to reassure him, but even she couldn't shake the feeling that danger lurked just around the corner. One evening, as they pored over documents stolen from Harper's old files, they stumbled upon something shocking. Hidden deep within a folder labeled Confidential were blueprints for a global network of financial manipulation. It outlined how the syndicate used shell companies, offshore accounts, and bribed officials to control markets, silence dissenters, and rig legal outcomes. There were names, powerful names of politicians, CEOs, and judges who were either members or puppets of the organization. Harper's own name appeared repeatedly, marked with notes about his usefulness in high-profile cases. "This is it," Harper whispered, his voice trembling. "This is what they've been protecting." Emily nodded, her face pale. She had always known her father was flawed, but seeing his complicity laid out so clearly made her stomach churn. Still, she pushed aside her anger and focused on the task at hand. If they could get this information to investigative journalist Linda Meyer, it might be enough to bring down the syndicate or at least expose its reach. But getting the information out wasn't going to be easy. Harper knew the syndicate would stop at nothing to keep its secrets safe. They had already sent assassins after him once. There was no reason to believe they wouldn't try again. And Daniel Cruz, the private investigator hired by Karoline Leavitt, was still somewhere in the city tracking them down. Time was running out. Daniel, meanwhile, had pieced together more of the puzzle. After speaking with Emily, he realized the scope of the conspiracy went far beyond Harper Industries. This wasn't just about a greedy CEO stealing ideas. It was about a vast, shadowy organization pulling strings across the globe. Daniel's instincts told him that taking down the syndicate wouldn't be easy, but he also knew it was necessary. Justice couldn't exist while such corruption thrived unchecked. He began following leads, tapping into his network of contacts in law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Slowly, he uncovered fragments of the same web Harper and Emily were unraveling. One name kept coming up: Victor Kane, a wealthy businessman with ties to multiple industries. Kane was rumored to be one of the syndicate's top leaders, though no concrete evidence had ever surfaced. Daniel suspected Kane was the key to understanding the full extent of the operation. Back in Chicago, Karoline Leavitt faced mounting pressure. Her company was struggling to stay afloat as investors pulled out, spooked by the chaos surrounding the lawsuit. Reporters hounded her for statements, and social media buzzed with speculation about whether she would drop the case altogether. But Karoline refused to back down. She held press conferences, gave interviews, and rallied support from tech innovators and activists alike. To her, this fight wasn't just about money. It was about setting an example, showing the world that even the smallest voices could stand up to giants. Karoline's determination inspired others to join her cause. Protesters gathered outside Harper Industries headquarters, holding signs that read, "Stop Corporate Theft," and "Justice for Innovators." Hacktivist groups leaked internal emails and memos, further damaging the company's reputation. For the first time, Richard Harper found himself on the defensive, scrambling to contain the fallout. Despite the growing momentum, Karoline knew the trial itself was at risk. Without Judge Harper to oversee the proceedings, the case had stalled. Legal experts debated whether a new judge could take over, or if the entire trial would need to start from scratch. The uncertainty weighed heavily on Karoline, but she trusted Daniel to deliver the evidence they needed to turn the tide. In Buenos Aires, Harper and Emily prepared to make their move. They copied the incriminating documents onto encrypted USB drives and drafted a detailed report outlining everything they had discovered. Then they arranged a secret meeting with Linda Meyer, who agreed to meet them at a secluded park on the edge of the city. The night of the meeting was tense. Harper insisted on carrying a gun despite Emily's protests. "I'm not dying for this," he muttered, checking the weapon one last time before slipping it into his coat pocket. Emily carried the USB drives, wrapped in a handkerchief and tucked safely inside her bag. They arrived at the park separately, scanning the area for any sign of trouble. Linda was waiting for them near a fountain, her laptop open and ready. She listened intently as Harper and Emily explained what they had found, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When they handed over the USB drives, she plugged one into her computer and began reviewing the files. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the documents, realizing the magnitude of what she had been given. "This changes everything," Linda said finally, her voice low but filled with resolve. "If we publish this, it'll blow the lid off the syndicate." Before they could celebrate, however, headlights cut through the darkness. A black SUV sped toward them, skidding to a halt just feet away. Armed men jumped out, their faces obscured by masks. Harper grabbed Emily's arm and pulled her behind a nearby bench, drawing his gun as shots rang out. Linda scrambled to pack up her laptop, clutching it tightly as bullets ricocheted off the fountain. "Run!" Harper shouted, firing blindly at their attackers. Emily hesitated, frozen in fear, until her father shoved her toward the trees. "Go! Now!" Daniel, who had been tailing them from a distance, heard the commotion and sprinted toward the scene. He arrived just in time to see Harper and Emily disappearing into the woods, pursued by the masked men. Drawing his own weapon, Daniel fired back, creating enough chaos for Linda to escape with the laptop. She ran in the opposite direction, clutching the precious data to her chest. For several harrowing minutes, gunfire echoed through the park. Daniel managed to take down 2 of the attackers before the rest retreated, climbing back into their SUV and speeding away. Breathing heavily, he scanned the area for Harper and Emily, but found no trace of them. Knowing they couldn't have gone far, he followed the trail of broken branches and footprints leading deeper into the forest. Harper and Emily emerged on the other side of the woods, gasping for air and covered in scratches. They collapsed onto the ground, exhausted but alive. As Emily caught her breath, she turned to her father, tears streaming down her face. "We can't keep running," she said, her voice breaking. "They'll never stop chasing us unless we finish this." Harper nodded, his jaw clenched. He knew she was right. Running had only delayed the inevitable. They needed to strike back, to use the evidence they had gathered to dismantle the syndicate once and for all. But doing so would mean risking everything, including their lives. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting a pale light over the city, Harper made a decision. He would contact Richard Harper, the man whose greed had set this nightmare in motion, and offer him a deal. If Richard cooperated, providing testimony and additional evidence against the syndicate, Harper promised to surrender himself to authorities and face whatever punishment awaited him. It was a desperate gamble, but it might be their only chance. Unbeknownst to Harper, Richard had already begun cooperating with federal agents. Fearing for his own safety and aware that the syndicate viewed him as expendable, he had cut ties with the organization and was working to bring it down. When Harper reached out, Richard saw an opportunity to secure his freedom while ensuring the destruction of the very people who had manipulated him. With Richard's help, Harper, Emily, and Daniel coordinated their efforts, pooling their resources, and planning their next move. They knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but they also knew they weren't fighting alone. Across the country, Karoline Leavitt continued to rally support. keeping the public's attention focused on the case. Linda Meyer prepared to publish her explosive story, ready to ignite a firestorm of outrage and demand accountability. The pieces were falling into place, but the battle was far from over. The syndicate was powerful, ruthless, and willing to do whatever it took to protect its secrets. Harper, Emily, Daniel, Karoline, and Linda were just ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances, but sometimes ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things. The plan was risky, but there was no other choice. Judge William Harper, his daughter Emily, and Daniel Cruz gathered in a cramped safe house on the outskirts of Buenos Aires. The room smelled of stale coffee and sweat, but none of them cared. Their focus was razor-sharp as they laid out the next steps. Outside, the city buzzed with life, oblivious to the storm brewing inside that small apartment. Harper's voice broke the tense silence. "If we're going to do this, we need to move, fast. Every second we wait gives them more time to prepare." His hands trembled slightly as he spread photocopies of the documents across the table. Each page was filled with incriminating evidence, names, transactions, and plans detailing how the syndicate operated. It was enough to bring down governments, let alone a shadowy organization like theirs. Emily nodded, her eyes scanning the papers. She had spent hours memorizing the details, knowing full well what they were up against. "We can't just hand this over to Linda and hope for the best," she said. "They'll come after her, too. We need to make sure it gets into the right hands." Daniel agreed. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "I've been in touch with some contacts back in the U.S. Federal agents are already working on dismantling parts of the syndicate based on Richard Harper's testimony. But they need hard proof, something undeniable. If we leak this information, strategically we can hit them where it hurts." The group decided to split the task. Emily would stay behind to ensure the safety of the original documents, while Harper and Daniel worked to deliver copies to trusted allies. They knew they couldn't trust anyone completely, not even the authorities. But they had no choice but to take the risk. Time was running out and the syndicate was closing in. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt sat in her office in Chicago, staring at her laptop screen. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from supporters, lawyers, and reporters, but she ignored them all. Instead, she focused on an email from Linda Meyer. Attached was a draft of the article Linda planned to publish, complete with excerpts from the leaked documents. Karoline read through it carefully, her heart pounding as she realized the scale of what they were about to unleash. "This is going to change everything," Carolina whispered to herself. She forwarded the email to her legal team, instructing them to prepare for the fallout. Whatever happened next, she knew the spotlight would be on her company and on her personally. She wasn't afraid. In fact, she felt a strange sense of calm. For once, she wasn't fighting alone. Back in Buenos Aires, Harper and Daniel set out under the cover of darkness. They carried USB drives loaded with copies of the documents, wrapped in waterproof bags and hidden in their jackets. Their first stop was a meeting with a local journalist known for exposing corruption in Latin America. The man listened intently as Daniel explained the situation, his face growing pale as he scrolled through the files. This is huge," the journalist stammered. "You understand the danger you're putting me in?" Daniel met his gaze, squarely. "Yes, and if you don't publish this, millions of people will remain under the syndicate's thumb. Is that what you want?" The journalist hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "I'll do it, but I need time to verify everything." "You don't have much," Harper interjected grimly. "They're coming for us. All of us." As they left the journalist's office, Harper felt a pang of guilt. He was dragging innocent people into his mess, forcing them to risk their lives for a cause they hadn't asked to join. Yet deep down, he knew it was necessary. If they didn't act now, the syndicate would continue to thrive, unchecked and unchallenged. Their next destination was a small cafe where they were supposed to meet one of Daniel's contacts, a former intelligence officer turned whistleblower. But when they arrived, the place was eerily empty. The lights were off and the chairs were stacked upside down on the tables. Harper frowned. "This doesn't feel right." Before Daniel could respond, the sound of tires screeching caught their attention. A black van pulled up outside, blocking the entrance. Armed men poured out, their faces masked and their weapons drawn. Harper cursed under his breath. They found us. Without hesitation, Daniel grabbed Harper's arm and pulled him toward the back exit. They burst through the door just as bullets shattered the glass behind them. Ducking into an alleyway, they sprinted as fast as they could, weaving through narrow streets and dodging startled pedestrians. Harper's lungs burned and his legs screamed in protest, but he forced himself to keep moving. Giving up wasn't an option, not anymore. After what felt like an eternity, they reached another safe house, a tiny apartment belonging to one of Daniel's old friends. Gasping for air, Harper collapsed onto a chair while Daniel locked the door and checked the windows. That was too close, Daniel muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. They're getting smarter. Harper nodded, his mind racing. We need to get these files to someone who can protect them, someone untouchable. Daniel thought for a moment before pulling out his phone. He dialed a number and waited anxiously for the call to connect. When a familiar voice answered, he breathed a sigh of relief. "It's me," he said. "I need your help." On the other end of the line was Agent Laura Bennett, a high-ranking official in the FBI's anti-corruption unit. She had worked with Daniel during his time in law enforcement and trusted his judgment implicitly. After hearing him out, she agreed to send a team to retrieve the documents. "But you'd better be ready to explain yourself," she warned. "This kind of thing doesn't happen without consequences." Hours later, a pair of unmarked cars pulled up outside the safe house. Agents wearing bulletproof vests and carrying briefcases stepped out, their movements precise and efficient. Harper handed over the USB drives, watching as they sealed them in tamper-proof containers. One of the agents turned to him. "You realize you're implicating yourself in all of this, right?" Harper nodded solemnly. "I know. But it's the only way to make things right." Agent Bennett approached him, her expression unreadable. "You're taking a big risk, Judge Harper. Are you sure you're ready for what comes next?" "I don't have a choice," Harper replied softly. "I've spent my life serving justice, or at least pretending to. Maybe this is my chance to actually do something meaningful." As the agents drove away, Harper felt a strange mix of fear and relief. The weight of his actions pressed heavily on his shoulders, but for the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, they stood a chance of winning. In Chicago, Karoline received word that federal raids targeting the syndicate had begun. Dozens of arrests were made overnight, including several high-profile figures. News outlets erupted, with headlines announcing the takedown of one of the largest criminal organizations in history. Social media lit up with praise for Karoline and her team, hailing them as heroes who had taken on the impossible. But the victory came at a cost. That same morning, a news alert flashed across Karoline's phone. Judge William Harper had been arrested in Argentina and was awaiting extradition to the United States. Charges ranged from conspiracy to obstruction of justice, and prosecutors hinted at more serious allegations to come. Despite everything, Karoline felt a pang of sadness. Harper might have been corrupt, but he had ultimately played a crucial role in exposing the truth. Later that day, Karoline held a press conference outside her company's headquarters. Reporters crowded around her, shouting questions about the lawsuit, the trial, and the future of her business. She raised her hand for silence, her voice steady as she addressed the nation. "This fight has never been about me or my company," she began. "It's about standing up for what's right even when the odds seem impossible. Today we've sent a message to the world. Corruption cannot hide forever. Justice may be slow, but it will always prevail." As the cameras flashed and applause rang out, Karoline allowed herself a small smile. The road ahead would still be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, she believed in a brighter future. Little did she know, the final chapter of this story was yet to unfold. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Reporters jostled for space, cameras clicked incessantly, and murmurs rippled through the crowd like waves. It was the trial of the century, a spectacle that had captured the nation's attention. At the center of it all sat Judge William Harper, his once imposing figure now diminished by handcuffs and a somber expression. The man who had once presided over cases with authority now faced charges ranging from corruption to conspiracy. His fall from grace was complete. Across the room, Karoline Leavitt stood tall, flanked by her legal team. She wore a simple black dress, her posture confident yet humble. Her journey had been long and grueling, but she had refused to give up, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Today she wasn't just fighting for her company or her livelihood. She was fighting for justice, for everyone who had ever felt powerless against the forces of greed and corruption. The prosecution presented its case with precision, laying out a mountain of evidence against Harper and Harper Industries. Emails, financial records, and testimonies from whistleblowers painted a damning picture of collusion, manipulation, and betrayal. Richard Harper, the CEO of Harper Industries, took the stand as a key witness. Though he admitted to unethical practices, he shifted much of the blame onto the syndicate, claiming he had been coerced into compliance under threat of violence. His testimony added fuel to the fire, further exposing the depths of the conspiracy. Judge Harper, now stripped of his title and dignity, listened silently as the walls closed in around him. He had cooperated with investigators to some extent, providing information about the syndicate's operations in exchange for leniency. But his efforts were too little, too late. The damage he had done, to the legal system, to Karoline's life, to his own family, was irreparable. As the trial progressed, public outrage reached new heights. Protesters gathered outside courthouses across the country, holding signs that demanded accountability and reform. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Justice for Karoline and End Corporate Corruption. People from all walks of life rallied behind Karoline, inspired by her resilience and determination. For many, she had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the smallest voices could make a difference. Meanwhile, Emily Harper watched the proceedings from the sidelines, her emotions torn between anger and sorrow. She had spent months working alongside her father to expose the syndicate, believing it was the right thing to do. Yet seeing him sit there, broken and defeated, filled her with a deep sense of loss. Their relationship would never be the same, but she knew she had made the right choice. Sometimes doing the right thing meant sacrificing personal ties for the greater good. Daniel Cruz remained a steady presence throughout the trial, supporting both Karoline and Emily while ensuring their safety. His years of experience as an investigator had proven invaluable, helping to piece together the puzzle and bring the truth to light. Though he preferred to stay out of the spotlight, he couldn't help feeling a sense of pride. This wasn't just a victory for Karoline. It was a victory for everyone who believed in fairness and integrity. Linda Meyer's articles continued to dominate headlines, shedding light on the inner workings of the syndicate and its far-reaching influence. Her relentless pursuit of the truth earned her widespread acclaim, cementing her reputation as one of the most fearless journalists of her generation. But for Linda, the accolades were secondary. What mattered most was knowing she had played a role in dismantling a corrupt system. In the final days of the trial, Judge Harper took the stand in his own defense. His voice trembled as he recounted how he had been drawn into the syndicate's web, lured by promises of wealth and power. He admitted to making terrible mistakes, acknowledging the harm he had caused not only to Karoline, but to countless others. "I failed," he said, his eyes glistening with tears. "I failed as a judge, as a father, and as a human being. All I can do now is ask for forgiveness." The jury deliberated for 3 days before delivering its verdict. Guilty on all counts. Judge Harper was sentenced to 20 years in prison without parole. As the gavel struck, sealing his fate, he lowered his head, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The courtroom erupted in applause, though Karoline remained silent, her expression unreadable. For her, this wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a moment of closure. Richard Harper received a lighter sentence after agreeing to testify against the syndicate. His cooperation led to multiple arrests, including several high-ranking officials and executives. Harper Industries collapsed under the weight of lawsuits and scandals, its assets seized and redistributed to victims of its crimes. Karoline's company, once on the brink of ruin, began to rebuild stronger than ever, fueled by renewed investor confidence and public support. In the weeks that followed, Karoline gave a keynote speech at a technology conference, addressing a crowd of thousands. She spoke passionately about the importance of ethical leadership and transparency, urging innovators to stand firm in the face of adversity. "This fight taught me something important," she said, her voice resonating through the auditorium. "It's not enough to create groundbreaking ideas, we must also protect them. We must hold ourselves accountable, demand better from those in power, and never stop striving for a fairer world." Offstage, Emily approached her after the speech. They exchanged a warm smile, their bond strengthened by shared struggles. "Thank you," Emily said softly, "for everything." Karoline nodded, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder. "We did this together, and we'll keep fighting, no matter what comes next." As the two women parted ways, Karoline felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she knew she wasn't alone. Across the country, people were waking up to the realities of corruption and inequality, demanding change and holding leaders accountable. Together, they were building a future where justice truly mattered. And somewhere, in a federal penitentiary, Judge William Harper sat in his cell, reflecting on the choices that had brought him here. He thought of his daughter, of the lives he had ruined, and of the ideals he had once sworn to uphold. Though he would spend the rest of his days behind bars, he hoped his story might serve as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the cost of greed and the value of integrity. The battle against the syndicate was far from over, but for now, the tide had turned. Justice, though delayed, had finally prevailed, and in the hearts of those who had fought so hard for it, hope burned brighter than ever.